Hey, welcome back to the Berean Files. My name's Zach, and today I have the pleasure of sitting here with Tim Constantine of Six Sensory Podcast, and I'm super stoked to be doing this. Very fun. How's it going,
Yeah,
man?
it's going good. Appreciate you for having me on, and I'm excited about what we're going to get into.
For sure, man. I was telling you just before we started talking here. Uh, with this being a relatively young podcast, and we're trying to build out this uh foundation that people can kind of build upon, or that we can build upon with the show, and people can kind of follow that along. And when we're 20, 30 episodes out, people can refer back to some of these earlier ones to kind of go, oh, okay, so there's the explanation for some of this weirder stuff they're saying down the line. um, we've talked about a bunch of weird stuff thus far, man. I mean, we've kind of, one of the first big things we covered is the fact that that Satan is just, he's got one lie that he's been pushing since the beginning. It's the same kind of scheme he's had forever, and he just rebrands it a million different ways. Um, we talked about Gnosticism and Kabbalah and the divine feminine with Stephen from the Biblical Hitman, who told me to say hi to you, by the way. I forgot to do that already. But one of the things that came to mind for me that I think is huge, and I've heard you kind of touch on your show a little bit, is just like esoteric origins of the US, Western civilization, getting into like Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons. And, the Nazis were into all sorts of occultic stuff. And like, I think all that kind of plays a hand in where we're at today. And I don't think it's on the average Christian's mind at all. Is that a fair
Yeah,
statement?
yeah, that's a fair statement. And all those people you mentioned included that into their life's work or into their empire building. But what I'm starting to see is that it goes back to an earlier group of occultists. And I think all that stuff that you mentioned too is a flavor of this. Like Gnosticism is definitely there. The Kabbalah is definitely there. If we get into Sir Francis Bacon, some the hardcore Francis Bacon researchers say that he was indeed a Kabbalist and
Mm,
that he took that back to Enoch, son of Cain, and these Atlantean traditions that they believed Enoch was a king of Atlantis and passed this information down, and that's the type of Kabbalah that he was working with. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but it goes back to this earlier group that helped start this country in particular, which I think is what we were going to talk about. But
absolutely, man. I mean,
yes,
and
like
go further back than that if you want to. So your call.
Blavatsky did when she came over in the late 1800s, and Steiner had a similar comment as well. They both acknowledged that the government was being ran wholly by the mystery schools in the late 1800s, US government. And so everything I'm saying today is probably just going to even be scratching the surface because what is going on here is, from what I can tell and what I could pinpoint, the mystery schools going back to the late 1400s on into the early 1900s, where you see these quotes from Blavatsky and Steiner. They those mystery schools were running shop, whether it's the British Empire, the founding of America, or the short-lived Nazi Third Reich Empire.
So,
And
so kind of two things there. One, I think scratching the surface is totally fine because for a lot of our viewers, this is probably the first time they've even heard some of this stuff.
it's
But
such a it's so big it's hard to give it all in one setting. So
well,
it's a
each time
lot.
you hone
But I'll
in
go
on
deep. I'll go deep. Don't worry about that.
oh yeah, please, man. But like, it just seems like anytime you hone in on one little thing, it opens up 50 other things that you then
Exactly.
have to give the same amount of attention to. And next thing you know, you're a crazy person. So like, it hits you hard, man. It hits you fast.
Hmm.
Um, but I think scratching the surface is fine, and I think going deep where we can is fine too. But you
Okay.
were talking about the mystery schools. What mystery schools exactly?
Yeah. Well, I'll take it back further in a minute. I'll take it back as far as I can to give you some foundation for this. But when as it pertains to the beginning of America, it was an accord of several different mystery schools. It was, from what I can identify, Templars, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and a little known Order of the Quest.
I don't know that one.
Most people don't, and I'll circle back to that one, but it was those groups, and I think they all spring from the same trunk of the same tree, and it just goes back earlier than that. And because Masons, the traditions of Masonry were have been around for millennia before the inception of modern Freemasonry as we know it.
Do you think there are ties between Freemasonry and like Kabbalah or even like Egyptian roots?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the Rosicrucians. They were very much inspired by the Egyptian stuff. The Masons were as well. Um, but certainly the Rosicrucians, Rosicrucians have a museum and a sort of headquarters in California that you can go and visit to this day, and it's like a Egyptian museum. It's all Egyptian artifacts. But this all goes back from what I could tell, possibly 8,000 years, potentially potentially further, but 8,000. And you see these groups coming to the Americas, and what they're doing is they're bringing this occult religion with them. And it's this old occult religion that I think will later spawn these groups that I've mentioned. But if I'll start in the Mediterranean and I'll give you an example. If you look at the Mediterranean and you look from east to west, there's three islands in a row. It's Malta, Crete, Cyprus. And all three had, and we're home to a very old culture with a occult religion, especially the goddess stuff. I heard you mention divine feminine. This was
Yeah, that's
very
pretty
much
cool.
a part of that. So archaeology tells us that people have been on Malta, for example, since 6,500 BC, and they were worshiping the goddess there. Here in America, in Tennessee, down in the corner, right where Tennessee meets uh, Georgia and Alabama, is a place called Russell Cave. And there's the way that the clay settled in the cave is like a layer cake of ancient civilizations. That date also goes back to 6,500 BC, same as Malta. And if you just go right down the road below Russell Cave, you get to Etowah Mounds. And
What is
Etowah Mounds,
Edwa Mounds?
Etowah, yeah, Etowah. And what we see there is goddess symbolism as well. So because they're on Malta, because they have boats, because they worship the goddess, I think they were coming over here. And that's just one example. And I think those dates match up. So I think possibly going back that far, you have people coming over here to the Americas with this occult religion. And also, what you also find in that cave was a bone torch. Very Greek. It's a very Greek thing. That's why they light that torch at the Olympics. That's an old Greek tradition pertaining to a bone torch.
This is
So
in the cave
that,
in Tennessee.
yeah, yeah. So that was also there. So there's a lot of these little links. I don't want to spend all day like going through
Well,
categorizing and all that, but there's so many of these different links. And I think the oldest form of occultism that I can pinpoint in general was this goddess culture, and I certainly see it over here. And I'm sure you had as well, like the line of Cain, whatever they developed, that was in the mix. But going back to Atlantis, even and Plato in Critias, he talks about how the goddess instructed them on how to build their shields and their spears. So the
that's
goddess,
very Book of Enoch, right? Like the Watchers coming down and instructing how to forge
oh
weapons.
yeah,
George, how to practice martial arts, how to make cosmetics. That feels very in line with that way of thinking.
Yeah, I thought that too. That was like Azazel's job, or yeah, that's what he was said to have done in the Book of Enoch, was teach men warfare and how to craft those sorts of weaponry, right? Yeah, yeah. But so and like I don't want to make this a goddess episode, but that's certainly there and it helps. I include it because it's our history. It's just not being taught. I don't know how that got overlooked this long, but people were really worshiping this goddess stuff. So it's in the mix and it helps me tell like and follow the migrations of occultists to America as well as seeing that symbolism and recognizing it.
I've got a question for you, and
Yeah.
this is kind of a weird one. So if there's nothing, feel free to shoot me down. But is there any evidence of like the Eleusinian mysteries taking place on U.S. soil?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I'll get into that actually right now
Okay.
if you want.
Okay.
I've got this thing I want to read to set this up. It's a little unpublished material here, and I'm writing that down as a note to make sure I hit Eleusinian mysteries because this plays right into it. So I'll read this and this might set it up. Long before the familiar dates of 1766, of course, when the nation was started, 1766, long before it was etched into history, there are those who believe a deeper current was already in motion, one that stretched back centuries, even to the ancient world of secretive orders and esoteric symbols. According to this view, the founding of America was not merely a political act born of Enlightenment ideals, but the culmination of a much older design. The story begins intriguingly in the late 12th century. Around 1176, it is said that a ship associated with the Knights Templar sank off the coast of Newfoundland. This is key because I can prove that the Vikings were in the area for 200 years before this Templar ship sunk
In the U.S. area.
in the U.S., right outside of Canada,
Okay.
Newfoundland. They
Yep.
were
Yep.
coming down in the Maine and coming down into the U.S.
Okay.
So I know we're jumping around a little bit, but
Yeah.
we're going to focus on 1176 for a minute and this Templar mission. And I'm going to show you this symbolism that I think our founding fathers used, and it plays into the Eleusinian mysteries. Okay, so accounts describe artifacts aboard this vessel. Now, this is the sunk ship bearing the image of Tanit, which is an ancient goddess figure. She was depicted with her arms raised. This posture, found across multiple ancient cultures, is often associated with a divine authority, protection, or the ability to bridge realms. We see this on Minoa, on Crete as well. From Minoan Crete snake-holding goddess to the horned figure of Cernunnos in Celtic tradition, the motif suggests hidden access, hidden knowledge to crossing between worlds, physical and spiritual alike. Some interpret the raised arm symbolism of Tanit as corresponding with the constellation Virgo. If so, the timing of the Templar voyage and even their presence in the New World takes on symbolic meaning. I'll skip a little bit here. The suggestion follows that these Templars possibly arrived in September under the sign of Virgo, embedding their mission not only in geography but in the heavens. From this perspective, their journey was not accidental. It is believed that the Templars established hidden vaults in a new world, repositories of knowledge among and wealth, or both. Among the most frequently cited locations is Oak Island, which Ben Franklin, we now know, would later use to fund the American Revolution. So, you fast forward 6 centuries.
Can we hold tight there
Yeah,
real quick?
go ahead.
Question.
Yes.
So are they drawing a parallel between Tanit and Mary as Templars? Because so the
Oh,
Templars are coming out of the Catholic tradition, right?
I don't, I think that's incorrect that they did that. I know people say that, but
What, that they came out of the Catholic tradition?
yeah, yeah, there
Oh, that
was.
Yeah, give me.
there was misinterpretation there, I think, of history. I think what they did was they briefly worked with the Catholics to help pilgrimage to the Holy Land,
So you think
but
they were like kind of like
they were an occult order from the start.
and so they were sort of like working for hire with the Catholics, but
Yeah.
they're a separate organization. Okay, cool. I'm good. That's all
Yeah,
I have.
yeah, yeah. We can come back to that too, but well, I know that that's a lot, but I think it sets the stage, and it was nice and eloquent, so I wanted to read it. Basically, I think what it's suggesting is that the founding fathers, there is this shipwreck up there. It's been talked about. It's published in multiple books. A couple people went out there and looked at it, verified it, saw the Tanit symbolism, the goddess symbolism, saw it was a Templar voyage. The founding fathers, exactly 600 years later, in 1776, signed the Declaration of Independence, right? And then signed the Constitution underneath Virgo, which is what that symbolism is suggesting. And then the official commemorative art for the signing of the Constitution under Virgo shows uh, Estrella, this goddess Estrella, who is Virgo. She's looking down over the Western Hemisphere, looking down at America, and she's holding a picture of George Washington. So the symbolism is connected to the founding fathers and the signing of our first documents. The Tanit Virgo Estrella goddess symbolism is a constant thread there. And to your point, or what you asked me about, the Constitution was signed in the third week in September. That's when the Greek version of the trek to Mecca happened. That's when they went to um, Eleusis,
Mm,
which is the Eleusinian, the site of the Eleusinian mystery. It's called the Pan-Helletic Sanctuary of Eleusis. Every third week in September, regular people would go and have this once in a lifetime experience and do this rite, do this ritual, and have this transformation. It's associated with the goddess as well. They called her Dimitri or Demeter, excuse me, Demeter. And we still don't know what they did behind closed doors, that they did something, and it was the third week in September under Virgo, same as the signing of the Constitution. And I'll let you go because I know you got some stuff to say, but what I'm suggesting here is there is a thread between the sinking of that 1176 Templar ship, the vaults that the Templars established vaults like Oak Island, and the founding fathers. They knew about the voyage because Ben Franklin knew about the vault. Ben Franklin went and funded the American Revolution from the Templar vault that they established.
interesting.
So
Very.
there's the symbolism and little, breadcrumbs like that. We could put them together and see that there's more to this, the founding of this country.
Yeah, and I doubt we're gonna get like a total picture, but we might get a bunch of chunks of a mosaic, right? Like you kind of
Yeah.
see it come together. I got two questions. First one is regarding you said there was a goddess holding a picture of George Washington. What was that? Where you see that imagery?
That's in commemorative art from John Norman,
Okay.
and it's the late 1700s. I don't remember the exact date, but it's Estrella, the goddess Estrella, and she's holding a picture of George Washington, and it commemorates the signing of the
Got it.
Constitution.
Got it. The second question I had was, are you familiar with the Immortality Key book?
I've heard of it.
It's just about the Eleusinian mysteries. Now he tries to use it to explain away Christianity as a Eleusinian cult. Um, that part is lame, and I poo-poo it all day.
Hmm.
But a lot of the other research is really interesting. and there's some really good parallels you start to see between other cultures. So it's like I kind of was like, okay, so all this was great and well researched. Your Christianity part, you know nothing. That's fine. I'm going to use all this stuff over here. It's worth checking out if you ever get the chance. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it, and that's I'm starting to see that's a common sort of thing that happens out there. I don't know if the guy's a Gnostic, but the Gnostics like to do this. They like to take
Yeah.
things and say that, try to explain Christianity away with
Yeah.
these weird occult,
This
paths.
this dude was more atheist, but he saw validity in because basically he comes to the conclusion that the Eleusinian mysteries were it was Dionysus and Bacchus related, as well as Demeter.
Mhm.
And then who's her daughter? Is it Persephone? I don't remember.
Think so. There's a
But
Persephone that's involved with it. Yeah.
yeah, they're all tied to it. And the whole
Mhm.
idea is he claims that it's this um that you drink this ergot laced wine or barley wine or whatever, and then you have this near death experience where you come back and you're no longer afraid of death. And so he, of course, then tries to relate that to the Eucharist or communion or whatever you want to call it. But um
Oh
that
yeah,
I
it's the whole Christianity is just taking this concept from the pagan world and redoing it. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah. It's super lame that part. But I don't he's sly with it. He is sly with it. But there's a lot of decent research even though it's a really lame book. But yeah, I don't know. I asked that because he brings up just how cross-cultural that thing is. And when you start talking about like, hey, America seems to be pretty much into everything else somewhere along the lines, I was like, hey, I wonder, so
yeah, yeah. And on that note, I think it's a good chance that some of the earliest writings that we have are from Enoch. And I'm going to remember to do it this time. There's two Enochs. You have to tell people. There's
yeah.
one from the line of Cain, and there's one who's not from the line of Cain. And the one who is not wrote the book of Enoch. And I think that book of Enoch and that Enoch, some of Moses may have been basing what he was writing off of that. That could have come way earlier. And I know this is a whole other, area to explore, and probably shouldn't go there today because it's off
That
topic.
one's tough,
But
right? Because people would argue that the like first Enoch, because he's like third Enoch gets wonky, but
I'm
like
talking about first.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. But like people, if you look at the scholarship around it, it seems to be Second Temple literature, and so I think a lot of scholars will probably push back that it was actually written by Enoch. So I mean, that would be like, yeah, that would take a whole episode to even talk about.
Yeah. It's a
But
cool thing to consider.
look, regardless of who wrote it, I think it's very interesting and I think it's got a lot of plausibility to it. So I'm all ears.
Cool, man. We can circle back to that concept. That's a really cool concept to explore. But so because I know I threw a lot at everybody early on, I'll just sum it up and we'll keep on trucking. I think, the question here that I will pose is, did the goddess worshiping Templars in 1176 come over, stake land claims? Forgot to mention that part because I think they did that too. Stake land claims and lay the groundwork for their Masonic brothers 600 years later to start the country, and in doing so, inlay this patchwork of goddess symbols and clues like the ones I've brought to your attention? I
Yeah.
think the answer is yes. And I think it's we just have to go out there and find more clues. They're out there. I can include some today, of course. One big one, it would be Pike himself alluded to this. Albert Pike. Um, Pike said in letters, Pike said he went out west looking for the signs, symbols, and tokens left behind by our brothers and fellow knights Templars who coveted the goddess.
If I'm not mistaken, and for anybody listening, Albert Pike essentially wrote the Masonic Bible. It's like their
Right.
handbook. Morals and Dogma is required, not required reading, but suggested reading. It may be required for like 33rd degree guys. But um, Pike essentially equates Knights Templars to 33rd degree Masons, does he not?
I'd love to see it spelled out. If there's not a direct quote that says that, I mean, yes, he certainly suggests that.
He
Yeah,
sees a tie
th-
regardless.
they're tight knit. Yeah, I mean, in that quote, he says our brothers and fellow Knights Templars, they were here in America before Columbus. He's alluding to that, and he uses that word. Well, first of all, there were Templar artifacts found out west that I can show you on Google. One's called the New Mexico Templar stones.
Hmm.
That's out west, and it's got an eight-pointed star of Ishtar on it. So what he's saying checks out with some of the artifacts. They really were here. They really were leaving their mark. And he uses that interesting word in there. He says the Templars who were over here covenanted the goddess. And I looked into that word. That word covenanted, it comes from the word coven. Comes out of that. It means summoned. It means convened with.
So not coveted,
Uh,
covenanted.
covenanted. It means they were in this. They were in a cult.
Interesting.
And it's like sort of like saying that he walked with God.
Hmm.
It's suggesting a tighter relationship with the being.
Got it.
Like he's not just a passive Christian. You know, you have passive Christians and then you have Christians who walk with God.
Yeah.
I think what he's saying is you have occultists and then you have Templars who
Uh,
convene with
there's like
this
the
spirit.
fans, and then there's the people hanging out backstage, and these are the
Yeah.
guys hanging out backstage.
Yeah. And Pike said that they were out here mapping out meridians, essentially ley lines.
Hmm.
And he notes that Brigham Young actually found one he liked because those early Mormons were Masons. So out of whatever the Templars were over here doing, they, like you said, they had a relationship with the Masons and they were exchanging information with them to the point where Brigham Young used some of this mapping out of the land and puts a Mormon temple on it. They called it the Great Western Meridian that they found out there. So, and then, these are all little clues to the founding of America, right? That it goes back a little bit further and it goes back to this other, these men of the order, I'll say, because I think what happened was Washington, Jefferson, Franklin came along and just simply followed through with this plan that was already being plotted out by the older Templars and the older Rosicrucians. I can get to that later, like Bacon and all that. But they were. I do want to hang out on this for a second. They were mapping out ley lines, and
Can you
if
explain
you
lines for anyone listening?
okay, so it's a woo-woo topic. A lot of people will roll their eyes. A lot of people, think that this is ridiculous. But if you tell somebody I was on vacation and the town that I stayed was on the equator, they're not going to have any problems with that. They're going to be like, oh, really? It must have been hot. Now, if you tell somebody that the ancient world, they were putting pyramids and temples on ley lines, you get a different reaction. But I don't think there's a big difference there. I think that the ancients just knew about these energetic lines that are really there, and because it's like if you go to a physical therapist, the earth is like the human body, right? And you can ask people who have like acne problems and like they'll tell you if they've studied, they'll tell you, yeah, certain foods I used to eat would affect certain organs, and those certain organs would make me break out on certain spots because there's these connections in the human body, right? You can like if you give somebody a foot massage, these are like wacky examples I know, but like certain spots on the foot correlate with certain organs and
Right.
certain, you know,
Circulate.
Yeah, so the Earth is no different in my opinion, and you do have these lines, and the ancients knew about them. It's just been a forgotten sort of a science.
Well, and even on a like a biblical level, which we do have to do, this being the Berean
Yeah,
Files,
let's do it.
I was just gonna say, like, like Deuteronomy 32 says that God divided the nations according to the sons of God.
Yeah.
Who's to say that what God divided up are the same boundary lines people play by today? What if ley lines were the way that God divided the earth according to the sons of God? I'm not saying that that is, the case, but like God seems to work via regions. The spiritual realm seems to work regionally. God is a God of order, and order generally calls for division. So I don't see a problem with the idea of supernatural hotspots on the earth just based on the way it's been divvied up. I
Mhm.
don't, that doesn't seem crazy to me. Now, that also doesn't mean that it like has to be true, but we're talking about plausibility here. And it seems like it's a plausible topic to discuss, right?
Yeah, and you know what? I could have gone a different direction with this and just not used the term ley lines. I could have just stuck with meridians because that's, in all fairness, that's kind of what they were calling them. But the problem is some of these meridians aren't known to modern science, so they do kind of fall into this realm of, well, what really are these energetic lines? But for instance, you got your Revolutionary War cities, and they're in a line. DC up to Baltimore. From there, you go to Philly. Then you head north to New York City and ending in Boston. Those are all on a line. Now, it doesn't look like a perfect line, but what I'm told is that if you factor in some curvature, it is a perfect line and that it extends to Stonehenge. If that's true, and I do think that these stone circles were on ley lines, that's my personal opinion, then that would constitute, in all probability, that these cities were put on a ley line, just for example.
Sure.
So they were over here mapping that out.
So,
They believed in it.
exactly. Whether it's true or not, they believed in it.
Hmm.
That's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And hey, I
So
will to when we get to like modern day, if we get to modern day, we'll see. Um, can we come back to the 8 and 9 pointed stars? Because I remember you talking with the NDS guys about that, and I've got a few thoughts there. So
yeah, sure. I'll make a note. 8 pointed star. Let's get back to it. I'm sure. I have a feeling it'll come back up. But okay, I'm gonna read another paragraph of this unpublished material for us. This one's not gonna be as long. The founders themselves were deeply influenced by Enlightenment philosophy, but also by esoteric traditions. Many were familiar with the works of Sir Francis Bacon, particularly his vision of a utopian society described in New Atlantis. In Bacon's ideal world, knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, was the key to human advancement. It was a society guided not just by governance, but by wisdom, esoteric discovery, and a higher purpose, the rebirth of that long lost and fabled civilization of Atlantis. Or perhaps, personal note here, the land of Cain, that may be associated with Atlantis, in my opinion. The land of Cain, the land that Cain went to, that he was afraid he would be killed in. He got some sort of a mark. He was like, if I leave the parameters of the garden, I'll be killed. Is that Atlantis? Perhaps. But moving on, this concept of a new Atlantis resonates strongly with the idea that America was intended to be more than a nation. It was to be an experiment, a manifestation of an ancient dream, a place where knowledge, freedom, and spiritual purpose converged. So we have Francis Bacon, and we have this idea from the New Atlantis, his book, that maybe all this knowledge going back to Atlantis has been preserved by the mystery schools, carried like a baton, passed on, and it helped birth this nation. And that, you mentioned modern day, so I'll throw this in. George W. Bush may have been alluding to this in his 2005 inaugural address. He says, when our founding fathers declared a new order of the ages, they were acting out an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Interesting.
That new order of the ages is on the dollar bill. Norvos Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages. It's taken from a Virgil poem about the return of Saturn, and they order revised it to mean the order of the ages. It was the order setting out to build New Atlantis. And Manly P. Hall takes it back to this Illuminati like group called the Order of the Quest that I mentioned earlier. And at first, I didn't think anything about that. I was like, oh, that's just a expressive title he's using. That's not a real group. Well, later I come across some of the work of Bill Cooper, and he said that it was a real group and that the early members of the Bush family were in it.
Interesting. Because the
So,
Bushes are generally kind of lumped in with Skull and Bones. That's the one that comes up with the
right.
Bushes a lot. Is there
I
a connection?
know. Well, I think so, but I think it was the Bush family comes out of the Order of the Quest, and probably a couple others. They were also Masons and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is, um, that would explain why Bush is talking about this in his speech and why he's like clued in, as his father was, because his dad, Bush Senior, gave that famous New World Order speech. So I think these guys were in.
Here with that, with Bush Senior's speech.
Yeah, he gave a couple speeches where he, at least one where he dropped that term, the New
Interesting.
Order, New World Order.
It's one you're seeing flashed around a lot right now,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
interesting.
So why what it's I think it's why that family in particular was clued into this. And again, I'll try to bring it home for people, make this all make sense. This was an accord of different orders, I think, that started the country. They were working in accord. Templars, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, possibly this Order of the Quest that had strong ties to the Bush family, and some of these other more minor groups, probably like Skull and Bones. It
Yeah.
all goes back to what I call the order, the capital O order. And I think that's that Norvos Ordo Seclorum that's on the dollar bill. And it goes back to all these guys who read Francis Bacon and tried to enact that, because all these guys were in these orders. And Bacon himself was. Bacon was one of the first Rosicrucians.
So the Francis Bacon quote you gave, the or talking about Francis Bacon, you said it was to pursue freedom, knowledge, and spiritual awakening. Is that what you said?
Freedom, knowledge, freedom, and spiritual purpose converged.
Spiritual
But
purpose.
but but it's the manifestation of an ancient dream where knowledge, freedom, and spiritual purpose converge. But where we should draw a line here is what is that spiritual purpose? Where's that coming from? Is that coming from God, or is it coming from something else?
Well, that's what I was gonna say, man. Is that literally just sounds like the temptation of Eve, which is
Yeah.
a total theme that just keeps coming up on this show. Satan tempts her with God's holding something out on you. There's knowledge, hidden knowledge you need, so you can be free to be like a God, and then you can have this. You can lean into your true purpose, which is to be like God. It feels like this is just another rebranding of the same old thing, and it's like
Mm.
people just keep falling for it, man.
Well, that's why I included that little tidbit about Cain and leaving the garden. And I I see, in my opinion, that's what Atlantis was. It was a civilization that was either started by Cain or a civilization that he joined up with. Either way, it was just antediluvian empire.
Hmm.
So I do think it was a real thing, and I don't know if they called it Atlantis, but all these occult orders draw their influence back to this and say
Right.
it. They'll tell you. So there was something there, and we know from the Bible that the pre-flood world was a pretty wild place, and that this kind of stuff was happening. So I assume, going back to the garden and what you're saying, this was Cain was a big part of this, and this is all, yeah, a rebranding of the stuff that Cain was doing as well, with Lamech and Enoch and that line. I mean, that's what some Freemasons take the order all the way back to Tubal-Cain, his son of Lamech, son of Enoch, son of Cain.
Interesting. Okay.
They have a symbol that's called two balls and a cane. And they say it's Tubal-Cain. Like that's
Really?
yeah, yeah.
That is
And
wild.
and he was a metalsmith or a
Right.
metallurgist. That's somehow involved with the masonry too, they said. And there's other things. Like some masons will take it back to the building of Solomon's temple, but some say it goes back further than that to the pre-flood world.
So, one, I was just having a conversation with somebody from my church about because we did an episode with Nephilim Death Squad yesterday, and they brought up the Statue of Liberty because with the new Trump picture that's just gone up, you've seen that, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yes,
He,
with the thing in the background with yeah.
yeah, it looks very reminiscent of the Statue of Liberty, the spikes on its head. So then we got into Apollo, we got into Lucifer and the imagery there. Um, Man, where was I going with that?
Well,
Uh,
I've got
oh,
something to say about
yeah.
that ties in, but I'll let you finish, please.
Well, I was just going to say the other thing that came up kind of linked with that in this conversation was the like in the ancient traditions when they would commemorate a new pharaoh, how they would bring them in and they would have the obelisk setting across from a domed building. And so you've got the phallus, you've got
Yep.
the ever pregnant belly of Isis. The pharaoh goes in, Isis's belly is impregnated by Osiris, and then
Right.
Osiris is born into the new pharaoh. And then that's the exact same setup we end up
Set
taking
up.
on for Washington, D.C. And so it's it's so undeniable that these Masons are so heavily into these occultic traditions, and we are so deeply influenced by them on a governmental level. That was all I was saying.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt, man. That, I think that that fits perfectly in. You're so right about that. Like it's in the layout of DC. It's like, did this group, like I'm suggesting, did they orchestrate the creation of America under these beliefs? This whole Norvis Ordo Seclorum, the phallus in DC, the Washington Monument, the pregnant belly of Isis, the Capitol dome. Did this group, this order, comprised of Templars, Masons, and Quest and Rosicrucians, were they acting all in accord? And is that why do we have these things in DC? I think so. I think that's why the symbolism is so strong in DC. I've been to DC. I've walked all over that city. And where are the crosses? Where are the Bible verses? Where's Jesus and where's the apostles? Because in large, all that is conspicuously absent. And Jesus is missing from these founding documents too that started this country. So, but wait a second, this is a Christian nation, so we're told. Okay, then why is it Rome and Greece and pagan gods and goddesses, right? Which is like, I talk about that a lot because I think it's overlooked. DC, very big on the goddess thing.
Well, isn't
So
Columbia a goddess?
it's, yeah, District of Columbia, which is Columbi, which is another word for dove. But Columbia is a goddess. Columbia is a dove. Ishtar is the goddess associated with the dove, or vice versa. The doves are associated with Ishtar.
Which is so is Ishtar and say like Asherah or Ashtaroth, or there's crossover there as well, right?
That's the same. Yeah, that's
And
the
so,
same entity. So the in the Bible we have Asherah, like you said, and Ashtoreth. That's the same entity as Ishtar and Nana from the Epic of Gilgamesh.
and so essentially what you're seeing is the same goddess vying for Israel's attention is the one we name our capital city after here in the US.
I suspect those ties are there because of the dove. And I
Mm.
haven't done a whole deep dive on the goddess Columbia, but I'm sure it probably springs from Ishtar because Ishtar is the great goddess. She's the one that most of them are based off of. And, in DC, you have, for example, just because I got to throw this in because you were hitting me with some of that crazy stuff, right? In the layout there, you have the Ellipse in DC. It's just park. It's a 52-acre park, kind of like an egg-shaped park, right? I feel like that's significant. But on the winter solstice, the shadow of the Washington Monument touches the ellipse, and that represents this mother goddess, represents fertility. And like you said, the monument is the phallus of Osiris. It was the missing piece of Osiris. If you go back to the old Egyptian myth of Isis looking for Osiris's body that had been cut into like I think 13 different pieces, the missing piece was the phallus. It's significant that that's in our capital city because it symbolizes the missing lost knowledge of the mystery
Oh
schools
wow.
going back to Atlantis because that's the
Is
first
that
two
how they would mark their capitals? Is that how they would mark their significant like sites of worship? Was with the missing piece? Like for instance, you would find that in Egypt, and at that time, Egypt was it. So it's sort of yeah, it's like passing the torch, except it ain't a torch. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
this is the new site. You know?
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I think in the case of our capital city, that's why it's there. It represents them reconnecting with the last final piece of the knowledge that goes back to Atlantis. And it symbolizes them connecting with it and using it to build this new empire, which is this new Atlantis. That's why I keep harping on New Atlantis because Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, they all read that book and they were acting out that ancient tradition that like what Bush was talking about. It was meant to be pursued and built. So they're saying we recovered the final piece of lost knowledge and founded our empire with it. And there's nothing more New Atlantean than that. And it sounds like pure crazy talk, but this is in all the legends. It's in the Isis Osiris legend. And these initiates from the 1700s would have known all this, as did Francis Bacon in the 1500s.
To your credit, dude, if anybody in the year 2026 is still saying that anything is crazy talk, that's not you.
Right.
You're not looking at anything. Everything is crazy talk.
Yeah.
Um, do you think any of our founding fathers were Christians?
Oh, I'm sure there were a few. I'm sure there were a few. That's the thing is there's always been pockets of Christians over here, and I think that's they were so strong and resilient that I think that's how this got it's as it's told it's a Christian it's said to be a Christian nation. And I think it's because these very strong pockets of renegade Christians. But I don't think the founding fathers themselves as a whole were Christian. I think the whole thing was like freedom to worship so that we can worship our old gods without persecution. And it's cool for everybody in a sense. Like I think it's cool as a Christian that that's how we do things here because when it starts to rain, everybody can get under that umbrella.
Right, right. Yeah, there is. I agree with you. I'm not gonna this what I'm about to say is not out of disagreement. It's just out of like on a strictly theological level. Freedom's a funny thing, right? Because like the Christian, this actually just came up on another show, but like as a Christian, like we're slaves to Jesus Christ, right? Like we've been bought by the blood of Christ. We belong to Him, and so like we are free in being His,
Hmm.
but like we're not free to do like whatever we want, right? But
Right.
we've taken that idea of being free to like kind of do whatever you want and built an entire nation on it.
Hmm.
And that is a little concerning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just
Um,
something that comes to mind every time I see like for instance the Statue of Liberty having the chain on her ankle broken off, like this idea of like being liberated from what, right? Like who are you being liberated from? Because if it's God, now that's suspect, so
hmm. Yeah. It's for me, this is about giving people the truth, giving people the truth about history,
yeah.
regardless of who it benefits. But I just want us to know our truth so we can move on and go from there. I think it's better at the end of the day to just know what it is. And these guys being occultists, like I'm suggesting, and starting this country doesn't mean we should throw everything out the window or
No, 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 no,
ball it
not
up
at
and
all.
throw it in the trash. It just means that they had different ideas on that on a spiritual level, and I think it helps maybe explain the state of things, state of affairs too. But yeah, for me it's about, you know, strengthening that pocket of renegade Christians.
I think that history shows that God's people have generally operated as kind of an outlier, as a pocket of renegade Christians. Like most of history doesn't show a vast majority of Christians really staying true to God. Usually it's like that's when things get comfortable and they fall away from God. So I think what's so cool about what you're saying here is it's like it gives you a reasonable step back and look at the situation and go, "Oh, maybe we weren't a Christian nation." Well, at least we know that now, and we can assess like how does a Christian live in a non-Christian world? You know what I mean? Like it's like let's just be realists here and talk about it for what it is, right?
Yeah.
Like it yeah, love it, dude.
Yeah, for sure. And because I don't want to I don't think we need to go on telling our kids and grandkids that, that all-seeing eye on the dollar bill is some Christian symbol because it's
That's
not.
crazy. That's
The same
absolutely
for, same for the Statue of Liberty and just, I mean, Washington D.C. again, great example. New York City too. I've been to New York, same stuff. It's all this pagan stuff is encoded in the architecture. It's all around you. It's like, why were we trying to pretend that that's something that it's not? No, those are based off of pagan ideas, very old ones at that. So if for me, it's about Isaiah 30, verse 20. It just, I don't know, this came to mind when we were just talking, so I'm just going to read it out. But it says, though the Lord may give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, your teacher will not hide himself anymore, but your eyes shall see your teacher. And when you turn to the right or when you turn to the left, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it."
Hmm.
And I would say a great companion verse to this for the pocket of Christians in this country would be John 3:16. Put those two together and we're good.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I think that that's all that matters. And as it pertains to history, though, in our true history, we need to understand it so we can strengthen ourselves as Christians in a world surrounded by things that are very much non-Christian. Just don't need to be in the dark about things anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're definitely living in a time of revelation. I don't want to mean, I don't mean that as in like the end. I hope not just yet. I'd like a few more years. That'd be all right. But just this idea of like, I mean, knowledge is so readily available. You don't have an excuse to not know what's going on these days, or at least to have an informed opinion on what's going on these days. So
Yeah.
I don't mean to drag you off course. I
No,
thought that
no. No, it's good, man. And it's good to we've taken this path in the conversation and talked about some of this because in the grand scheme of things, I think it does matter to talk about it. Yeah, like pledging allegiance to the flag and all that. I'm not going to go too far into that, but there's a there's those five pointed stars on there. This always ticks people off. So I'll just try to be cool with it. But like the
some of my
five
parents.
pointed star it goes back to the goddess worship. And I suspect that's why it's on there. I suspect that's why all the stuff is the way it is. So down to America itself, which is I think is Amaru. This one isn't a goddess. It's the chief deity of the Amorites. And we haven't talked about that today, but I do think that the Canaanites were coming over here. Canaanite Phoenicians, they were also Amorites, and they had ships. They were part of this. Some of them were part of that goddess culture I mentioned early on the islands in the Mediterranean. They all had ships. We can prove that, like now, that they were sailing over here. And I think so. For instance, I'm certain they were in South America because in Ecuador you have the Amaru River. It's a very old region down there they call the Orient, and it cuts right into the Amazon. And it goes back to the Inca, it goes way back before the Spanish. So I think whoever came here brought that Amaru word, but I think it's Amaru, Amaruca, and that's where we get America.
Interesting. The other thing that's really interesting about you saying you believe the Canaanites were here. So, I mean, the Canaanites had giants. We see that biblically,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things you see in like Native American folklore are the red-headed giants found in the US. And if you go, well, yeah, they came over with the Canaanites, it's like, oh, dang. Like
Mm.
that's like there's a biblical backbone for that very real possibility. So that's fun you
Yeah.
bring that.
Yeah, no doubt, man. That's exactly what it is. I think that came, I think they were driven out of the Middle East by Joshua and Caleb. They were driven across the top of Africa or the bottom of Europe or just across the Mediterranean in general. And I think some of them ended up in the Canary Islands, where you can go and see that there used to be a group there that were tall in stature, had red or blonde hair and blue eyes, and they were called the Guanches. They were remnants of the Canaanite people. I think they got pushed that far, and then the Canary Island represents a jumping off point. I think from there they got on ships and they came over here. That's just one route that I think they took.
Well, and that's also just like that would be your first round of occultic practices making their way to the Americas. So I mean that's just another layer on this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, hmm.
Yeah, it's another layer
We
to
know
it.
the Canaanites were into bad stuff. We know that biblically. Like they were a despicable bunch of people. So yeah, that's interesting, man.
Yeah, it's that stuff is deeply encoded in the landscape of ancient America, which that the goddess symbol I was talking about earlier from Etowah Mounds. What it is it's a hand with an eye in the center. It's called Hamza, the hand of Fatima. It comes from the Middle East.
Oh,
So
does
how
it have
did it
like
end up
thumbs on
at Georgia, right?
it? Is it like it's a palm, but it's got like another thumb coming off the other side of it?
Sort of. It's sort of. It's a palm with an eye in the center.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very like Indian looking like
Oh
guy.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
like the country India. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's yeah. It's from the Middle East, so how you have to ask yourself, how did it get here? And it's not just in Georgia, it's in Oklahoma and Alabama too.
Interesting.
And it's these very old sites, mound builder sites. So, and all the Native American legends say that the mound builders were giants. So once you collect enough clues around this, you start to put them together. It's what you're saying. It's like, oh, there was this old, long time ago, this group of people that were giants that came over here from the Middle East. And I'm suggesting they brought their Nephilim religion and their goddess worshiping religion over here with them.
Well, I think the other thing you have to kind of consider too, that I really hadn't thought about until just now is that, like, well, I'm sure I've thought about this, but like the idea that the spiritual sons of God, the fallen gods, the demons, whatever you want to refer to them as, the demonic, the dark forces, the powers, the principalities, nothing's stopping them from crossing a body of water. Like they can
Right.
come over here, and if there's people, they're going to impose their will on that people, right?
Yeah.
So it it seems like yeah, if you've got people bringing it with them, that's already bad because they're already band together. But I feel like wherever there's people, they're gonna try to take their route. They're gonna try to push what they can.
Yep. I'm looking up an article right now. This was recent. Uh, a 3,300-year-old Canaanite shipwreck from the late Bronze Age was discovered 90 kilometers off the Israel coast. They were sailing the seas. I know that's rather close
Yeah, yeah.
to, somewhat close to the shore, but
But
how
there's
did they get out there? And you can look at the boats and tell that they were meant for sea passage. So, it's the oldest deep sea wreck ever found and includes cargo jars, some of which were Canaanite. And
interest.
so that's one example of why I'm saying what I'm saying. It means, over 3,000 years ago, these people were sailing.
Yeah,
And in the case of the Canary Islands, the natural ocean currents bring you right to North America.
interesting.
That's why I say they jumped off there and some of them came over here.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I guess.
then there's a guy named Philip Beale. This guy's epic. He was studying these type of shipwrecks and he reconstructed a Phoenician boat and put it together. They built it and he sailed it around Africa and came around the bottom of Africa. And from that direction too, what he noted was that the ocean current started pulling him straight to North America as well.
Interesting.
So two things there you can take from that story. He built a Phoenician boat based on what they were doing, and it worked. So that and the natural currents surrounding Africa bring them right here, straight here.
Interesting, man.
And we know Phoenicians were Canaanites, and that's how you get them over here. That's how you get that presence over here. I think they were part of the mound building culture, and where it I guess intersects with what we're talking about today. I think that Jefferson and Washington were aware of this. I think they knew all about this. And that because those guys knew the land, they were surveyors.
Hmm.
And they had Lewis and Clark out looking for this stuff too. They had Lewis and Clark looking for all the ancient American stuff to do with the mound builders. They even told them to look for giants. They told them to look for the so-called white Indians because because these people come from the Middle East came over. Some of them weren't dark skinned, actually. Some of the Canaanites were Caucasian looking. They had blonde hair and blue eyes. Some of them came over and integrated with the natives. So by the time the settlers get here, and by the time you roll into the 1700s in Washington's time, there's still these little pockets of natives that are, white, for lack of a better way of putting it. They're they had Lewis and Clark looking for them, looking for artifacts, looking for all this out of place stuff. And Washington himself was a surveyor, and he surveyed Serpent Mound. He knew all about Serpent Mound, which is just that big ancient snake up in Ohio, which
Okay.
is that points back, in my opinion, to this group of giants that were probably Nephilim and had all these old occult religions as well. But Washington knew about Serpent Mound, and he had it put under special care.
I
So
didn't
the
know.
guys who started the country knew about this group of occultists that were over here long before them. It's just something
Yeah,
interesting to keep in mind.
that's a far cry from the idea that they just viewed, the native peoples of this land as these like brutes and all that. Like obviously there's some level of respect for what they saw them doing, you know, to
Hmm.
to preserve something like that. That's interesting. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, they did that. That whole thing started around the 1880s with a group called the Cosmos Club, ran by a guy named John Wesley Powell, who worked for the Smithsonian. They started really, really implementing the doctrine of manifest destiny, and were solidifying into the minds of people that the Native Americans were less than human, were brutes, were savages.
Just propaganda.
It's pure propaganda, and I don't know that the founding fathers held that view. I don't know that they did at all. It came later, and it spread over. John Wesley Powell was so well connected in DC and connected to government and academia that they were able to pipe that philosophy or way of looking at things through the entire system to where it took hold. That's why you hear that term manifest destiny. Those guys pumped it in through the air vents everywhere they could. So, I'll continue reading this one part again and see where it takes us. If there's anything else here I can mention. Let's
Yeah.
see. The signing of the Constitution in 1787 occurred under the sign of Virgo. I talked about that. Reinforcing the celestial connection. Virgo, often associated with Estrella, the goddess of justice. That's also Lady Justice, the
Hmm.
lady who holds the scales. That's Estrella.
Yep.
Forgot to mention
Yep.
that earlier. Who in myth left Earth during humanity's decline and was believed to one day return and restore a golden age. Some artistic interpretations of the founding era reflect this imagery, portraying Estrella descending once more, choosing America as her new home, a land where justice and order might be reborn. That's what I think you see in the John Norman art, where Estrella is holding George Washington. Even the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages, suggests a deliberate break from the past and a commencement of something transformative. To some, it was simply poetic language reflecting a new political era. To others, it hinted at something far more ambitious, the establishment of a new civilization rooted in ancient knowledge and guided by hidden principles. Within this framework, the Templars and the Founding Fathers are seen not as disconnected groups, but as mutual participants in the long arc of history. The Templars, Masons, Rosicrucians, custodians of secret knowledge and sacred missions, laid the groundwork. The founders, inheritors of Enlightenment thought and esoteric philosophy, brought that vision into reality. This suggests that beneath the familiar narratives of revolution and independence lies another story, one of continuity, intention, and the enduring human desire to build a perfect society, a new Atlantis, not just imagined, but attempted, acted upon. And here is where I would say enter Francis Bacon, Sir Francis Bacon, the author of New Atlantis. Bacon himself was called the grandfather of the English Enlightenment, which you've noticed I've used that word a few times today, that the term enlightenment, you've heard it, you've heard other historians use it. I'm suggesting that there's an occult underbelly to it, though. And Bacon inspired all these guys. Bacon was a Rosicrucian. Bacon was possibly a Templar as well. He was he influenced Masonry later down the line. And Manly P. Hall actually publishes an interesting picture of Ben Franklin overlooking the East Coast, and Bacon is standing behind him in the shadows, watching him. Like it symbolizes like the watchful eye of Bacon overseeing this operation that we call
Interesting.
America. And Ben Franklin, he's looking down at that row of cities, right? The Revolutionary War cities that are on the line, on
They're on the
somewhat
map.
of a line, right? So I think it's interesting to focus on those two guys when you're talking about the founding of this country because there's just so much wild stuff around them. They were so influential to this operation. Ben Franklin was being called Moses by some, and some were calling Bacon Elijah. They called
Oh,
him,
which is all very end of the world language.
yeah, they called him Elijah, the son of the new age, and they're
Interesting.
calling Franklin Moses. So in their minds, because Franklin adopted the term Moses, and he was actually putting that on some of the government seals. He was putting an image of Moses leading the children of Israel across the Red Sea. So he adopted it. So in his mind and in the minds of those around him and Bacon, they were building something, I think. And that's this concept of New Atlantis. And I think it's undeniable because Bacon wrote a book called New Atlantis in the first place that just kind of helped map all this out.
Manly
So
P gets into that pretty heavily too, right?
yeah, I would say that mainly P. Hall sort of exposed the whole operation,
Interesting.
spelled it out at least.
I have,
Franklin was, go ahead.
no, go ahead, because I'm going to take us off track a little bit.
Okay, well, I'll let you take us off track then, but I'll just say
Okay.
this. Franklin's interesting. When you
Um,
look at when you look at these guys, you single them out, I think you start to see why I say what I say about the founding of the country. Because if you take the time to look into each one of these guys, I mean, and if you know where to look, right? Because some of this stuff has been obfuscated, but Franklin is a good example. Franklin was associated with this very Crowleyan-like figure named Francis Dashwood. They were both in the Hellfire Club overseas because Franklin was traveling back and forth, but Franklin was in these occult orders, right? And one was the Hellfire Club, and the Hellfire Club was the original Crowley motto bearer, if you ask me, because their motto was "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." So
mm,
Crowley actually got that from Ben Franklin and his order.
and dude, let me just put on my little tinfoil hat for a moment. Did you watch Stranger Things?
I've seen the first few seasons of it. Yeah.
So in the
Oh
fourth,
yeah, yeah.
their D&D club is called the Hellfire Club.
Hellfire Club. Yeah, I remember that.
That's super interesting, dude. That's
Hmm.
odd. I didn't know that. Okay.
I think there's probably something to that. And then, Bacon, I keep talking about New Atlantis, the book he wrote, and it's just what it is it lays out the plot line that they could then sort of manifest into reality. It's like an occult order that is starting to put their faith in science because Bacon started to help start the British Royal Society, which would propel this thing that we know as science today into existence. They were putting their faith into science, and they were saying we can go and we can build this perfect utopia. It's like a philosophical occult empire that we can actually build, and we can reconnect with all the lost knowledge of Atlantis and do it right this time. You look like you had something you want to say.
Well, you're taking me a different route, and I want to come back there. But I
Okay, go
do.
ahead.
Well, so my one I was afraid I'd take us off track on. We don't have to go way far down this rabbit hole. I just was curious. You were talking about oh my gosh, the goddess, the goddess talking that had chosen the U.S. A
Mhm.
start. What did you call her?
Well, I think there's many names, but I think all those names are extensions of the great goddess that these guys
Sure.
actually believe in. So I've talked about Tanit or Estrella
Estrella.
or,
That was
okay.
the one I think of. Do you think there are any ties um, or any imagery found visible in the apotheosis of George Washington painting?
Yeah, well, that's more on the level of that Osiris ritual, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, that would make sense. It's just what is so undeniably weird about the apotheosis of George Washington painting is one, it's called the apotheosis of George Washington, which is like George Washington reaching godhood is essentially what that is titled, right?
Yeah.
But then you've got him surrounded by all these like Greco-Roman gods. And so I didn't know if there was any nod to her in that painting. That's why I just
Hmm.
quick tidbit. I haven't
Oh,
deep dove that, but
I haven't looked at that in particular. I should. I should. The goddess, the female goddess symbolism is all over DC though. I mean, one that comes to mind we've mentioned is the pregnant belly of Isis, but on top of that, on top of the Capitol dome, there's a goddess up there. I don't remember which one it is, but there's a goddess up there, and then there's all this, you know, other symbolism that denotes sexual organs. We don't have to get into that. Some of it's male, some of it's female, but the female denotion is all over the place in
mm,
DC. And the goddesses are everywhere as well. And um and certainly with Bacon, um, he was probably William Shakespeare. I know that's a big one to throw in here,
yeah,
but
no, I've heard that actually.
well, he said that
Reasonable.
he said a divine voice inspired him to secrecy, kind of like this. All these guys, many of these guys said that they had these visions or these apparitions would come to them. Washington said he had one as well, where a lady came to him. Bacon said that this entity comes to him and inspires him to secrecy, tells him to hide from applause, tells him to write a book under a pseudonym, tells him to write out this history and use enigmatic language and use cunning mixtures of theater. So I think he's saying that he was inspired by something beyond the veil to become Shakespeare. And he chooses that name William Shakespeare because of Athena, the goddess.
Oh,
So he's hearing the voice and then he's using the name and it's goddess symbolism. So it's Wilhelm Shakespeare, right? Wilhelm is helmet. Shakespeare is shakes the spear.
interesting.
Athena Athena wears the helmet and holds the spear, shakes the spear. That's what she's known for in iconography. So
Interesting.
he was very much into Athena. It was kind of like his muse. And then he hears this voice and he does what he's told. So I think we see the goddess thread there. And I think this is just possibly some channeling that happened that set this whole thing,
It
into motion.
sounds very reminiscent of the stories about Hitler and Providence,
Yeah,
like the way he responded to the voice, to
right.
get up and move and all that. And some of that's kind of on the fence of whether that's real or myth and all that. I understand, but like it sounds very similar, just the
Oh
whole
yeah,
like a voice came and then it's like, oh, here, do this really profound thing. Next thing you know, you're a huge deal, like that's
yeah.
it's interesting.
I think I lean towards acceptance of those Hitler stories as being real, being based in some sort of fact. I mean, I looked into I used to just be a major World War II buff. That's what I spent a lot of time researching. And what I found was Hitler in World War One was in the trenches, and every day these guys are in the trenches. They are, faced with death. It might be their last moment at any moment. And he was writing where when other men were writing poems and prayers to God, Hitler was writing poems and prayers to Woden or Odin and Thor. So I
What
think
was the
that
magazine he subscribed to?
that's Ostara, which is Ishtar, the
Yeah,
Norse version of Ishtar. Yeah.
it's all over the place, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this guy's, yeah. So whether or not you can nail down and be like 100% this is factual, it's like, look, he's into a lot of weird stuff. I mean, the swastika, the lightning bolts, the Zeus imagery in the speech. Like, obviously, this dude is entrenched in the esoteric. Like,
Oh
why
yeah.
is this a reach? You know?
It's
Um,
not. It's not.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of, well, let me reword that. I'm a proponent that the Nazis were, in fact, occultists.
yeah,
Because that some people will look at that and scoff, and I just think it's been left out of the documentaries and 80 years of World War II history, but it's the truth. Just like everything else, it's just things have just not been told to us straight.
right. Also, I realized I was just pointing behind myself like there was some kind of swastika back there or something. There's not.
Yeah, you're
I was
good.
just pointing in random directions. Like
No,
somebody's
you're
gonna think
good.
I got flags hanging up back here, man.
Well,
Um,
that's, I think we can weave this in today. I think I mentioned this earlier on, which is many of these empires, the recent empires, were born out of an amalgamation of occult orders. Nazi Germany being no exception. The British Empire, no exception. That's exactly what I was going to hammer home next is like the influence of those occultists on the start of this country, like
well, that's the West too, right? I mean, it all comes together. It's all one thing working together.
yeah, yeah, it went different directions. Obviously, it went a very sour direction. It went south very quickly with the Nazis because with that brand of occultism, they were including all this dark arts messed with racist ideology, and it was too dark. It was too dark, and I think that's why the whole thing crashed and burned. I think that they were just. I don't want to get down a whole, Nazis and Hitler rabbit
It's like the
hole.
whole episode itself, right? Like,
It's like, yeah, it is. It really is. But like, nonetheless, mystery schools provide the foundation. It was the Thule Society that became the German Workers' Party that became the Nazi Party. That's what was going on in Germany. And the Thule was an amalgamation of all these other occult orders, the Bavarian Order, the Holy Grail, the Masons, they were in all these other different orders. The same thing happened in to spark the British Empire, just court of Queen Elizabeth. People like John Dee, they were Rosicrucians and Templars,
well, you could almost say you see the same
alchemists.
influence coming into like Russia under what's his face? Oh, the monk dude. With the beard, Rasputin. Um,
Rasputin, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, like you definitely, which I know there are takes where he wasn't actually the bad guy, and I've seen people go that route as well. But regardless, man, like you see this esoteric hand over all these major kind of. I know that Russia's not the Western world, but it is similar to the Western world in the way it operates. You see this hand on all these nations kind of at the same time,
Hmm.
which is really odd.
Yeah, yeah. And it's of course I argue that it's present in the beginning of America as well. I think the thing is like the guys who started the show, the guys who started the country were in these occult orders, and then the regular people is where you find the Christianity. It's just not in the beginning of the country. It's just not there. But I think just like you see in Britain, there were people in the general population there who were Christians. Like I said, there's these groups of Christians everywhere. They just don't seem to be ones that are starting any of the governments or any of the empires.
Right. Right.
So,
They're too busy out loving their neighbors and not trying
yeah.
to empires.
Yeah, yeah. But Elizabeth's court, that's just an interesting one because all these guys were over here. This is another thing I think that's been left out of the history books. A lot of these guys in Elizabeth's court, like John Dee, helped set all this up too. They were involved with this colonization operation to set up early America, and it was being orchestrated by guys like Bacon and the Rosicrucians and John Dee and Templars. And that's just so fascinating to me. I mean, part of the court was a guy named Sir Thomas Gates, who was one of the first, I think he was the first governor of Jamestown. It's like, what were these Rosicrucians doing over here that were, English? That's interesting. I know you don't remember hearing about that in school. Why was Sir Walter Raleigh over here mapping out ley lines? They said he was looking for this 77th meridian to put cities on it. Queen Elizabeth's court. Francis Bacon's over here, the Virginia Company, setting up colonies. And then you go and you look in the official records, one of the older colonies, one of the first colonies is called you. I'll see if I can get this right. Ephrata, I think is how they say it. It's called the Ephrata cluster, and it's an old colony. It's still there to this day, and it was founded by Rosicrucians. So there was this, colonization effort, and Bacon, as this is going on, his last work that we know of was a book that he was working on titled New Atlantis, Land of the Rosicrucia.
Hmm.
So I think that's a major clue there about what they were over here and what they were trying to do. They were trying to establish their presence alongside of the other people in the order.
Yeah.
And there were sorcerers, this was sorcery that was associated with Queen Elizabeth's court as well. Like they locked John Dee up in the Tower of London for sorcery. They locked
Yeah.
her up as well.
I think people like to pretend that that sort of stuff stopped with the ancient world. And it's like, no, like it just evolved, it changed hands, it rebranded a little bit, you know. That's something I really appreciate about Izzy Griffin's channel. He really seems to point out a lot of the current sort of esoteric, magical, witchy stuff going on in the world that would otherwise just kind of fly under the radar. But once you
Mhm.
see it, it's like, oh yeah, no, that is that. You know, like it's still here today. Why wouldn't it have been here a couple hundred years ago? Absolutely, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been suggested that, well, yeah, that's the thing. It's secular, right? What was happening then and some of the stuff I'm describing is still happening today, and it's still for the most part it's the same group. It's this small group of people, small handful of people in power, the elites, the politicians, the royals. It's still the same sort of playbook, and it's with Francis Bacon and that group and the Rosicrucians, it was they believed that powers and principalities from the spirit realm possessed the secret knowledge that they could in turn tap into, and they could use that for the benefit of humankind. They could channel essentially and then use it for the benefit of ruling mankind. I think John Dee for sure believed that. And he coined the phrase British Empire to begin with. And Francis Bacon, he was working with these very old Kabbalist, you know, manifestos or manuscripts, I have to say. And I think he was driving that too. So all these guys that helped start this thing up over here, I think did believe that, we can talk to powers and principalities and get knowledge and use that to rule.
Yeah. I think if I were to kind of summarize a lot of what you said, like you've used Atlantis a lot because it comes up in a lot of the literature. But if I were to go like a more just like biblical language on it, I would say like Babylon.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like Atlantis is a type of Babylon, and I feel
Yeah.
like we as the US have become a type of Babylon. And I really think it was kind of always meant to be, is really what you're showing us here.
Hmm. I think that's a good point. I think that Babylon was a it's an apt point because Babylon, in my opinion, was the revival of Atlantis.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe I didn't spell this out earlier, but for me, Atlantis, I am using that because it's in the literature a lot. I mean, the guy wrote the book called New Atlantis and everything. The first two Templars were told, as soon as they were initiated, they were told, go find remnants of Atlantis. We want relics and doctrines and anything you can find relating to that culture. To we need all the clues we can get to re-merge with this. So um I think that what that is, though, is if it wasn't just a place actually called Atlantis, I think it was an actual civilization that was associated with Cain before the flood.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very possible.
I may have said that earlier, but I do. That's what I see it as, and I think
Yeah.
you could get pretty weird here with how that whole thing kicked off. It's like
There's people
when
listening right now that are like, we haven't done that yet.
yeah, exactly, man, exactly. But when Cain killed his brother and was banished from the garden, he went and started a civilization. He actually went and started a city and he called it Enoch after his son Enoch. Why would I've often wondered, well, did he meet up with some people to procreate with?
Sure.
Well, and is that Atlantis?
Sure.
And was he just sort of breeding with Atlantis and continuing Atlantis? Only this time he's bringing all his Cain knowledge from the garden, because I do think that he took the knowledge he learned from the garden that was taught to his father Adam and turn that into the occult in his own type of way. I think the sacred sciences, the seven sacred sciences, and all that probably developed out of knowledge that Cain got from either the garden or from this Atlantean civilization or both. Then that's a bridge too far for some people, but that's just my opinion.
Okay. Dude, we have covered the gambit today. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
I do think this is probably like a good like scratch the service point. And I think like, if you were ever interested on doing more of this, I think we could probably take it a lot further.
Hmm.
But I think this might be like a good rounded piece for
Yeah.
people to chew on for now. You know what
Oh
I'm
yeah.
saying?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right on, dude. I'll tell you this too. At some point, I would like to talk to you about like I said, I brought up the stars. That's a whole rant, the whole 8, 7, and 8, 9 sided stars, all that with
Oh yeah.
goddess
Sorry about
worship.
that.
No, no, no. It would take us way, way, way too far off the beaten path. But I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but I would love to talk with you about the Enneagram sometime,
Okay.
because I think it falls right into that category. But we
Oh,
can
that
talk
sounds
about
cool.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, that's the one thing I meant to loop back to. We'll save it for another time. But yeah, the stars and the star forts and just
Oh,
that all
yeah.
that all that symbology, they're all connected. And I think the only thing that I would tie this up with is and connect it with the modern world is I think that this whole new Atlantis thread birthed technocracy.
I was gonna ask about that, but I didn't know that may be a whole episode too, man.
Yeah,
Just like the whole
yeah,
transhumanist agenda and
right.
technocracy and
Yeah, and we
yeah,
can just allude to it than today. I won't go into it, but I think that it comes out of this whole New Atlantean thread. I think that the tech barons, the modern tech bros, and the whole thing with technocracy, that is very New Atlantean as well, and I suspect it comes out of that. In fact, I think Elon Musk has even said publicly that he reads a chapter of New Atlantis every week
Well,
as like a
I think it's
devotional.
pretty, I think it's pretty hard to deny that it seems almost like a religious pursuit on their behalf because it's at the detriment of the human race, all of it. And they're gonna do it anyways. They're just gonna keep pushing it further, no matter what. That's wild. But
Hmm.
when you put it in all this context, it makes a lot more sense. You know what I mean?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, another day. I like
Yeah,
that.
no, it's a good place to that's a perfect
Yeah.
place to bring it in for landing, man.
For sure, brother. Hey man, well, I appreciate you talking with me, dude. It's been really fun. Um,
Absolutely.
you want to tell people where to find you, like subscribe, all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on. Look forward to talking to you afterwards about this concept that you brought up, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah, my name is Tim. My show is Sixth Sensory Podcast. I don't use the letter or the number six. I spell it out SIX. And you can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple. I'm also on Instagram and I have a Patreon. I drop bonus episodes every week on Patreon. But best place to find me is Sixth Sensory Podcast on Spotify. And this has been great, man. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, brother. Let's do it again. For all you listening at home, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. It helps us out. We're still trying to grow the channel. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us anywhere where podcasts are. You can find us on YouTube, whatever. But support us wherever you are listening. And until next time, stay lit, stay salty, stay Berean.